back to African Voices. You're still with me, Chiwe Chihana, and I've still got in studio with the Somalilanders. I've got Councillor Kaltum Rivers.
Hello. And
I've also got Mr. Adam Yusuf. And welcome back. So just before we went off, we talked about allies. I think it was quite a detailed discussion. And I put forward to you that, well, UAE as an ally as far as military uptake is concerned, and other things. I think the President Abdi mentioned quite a few other things he thought of. I was just wondering, I know it's quite difficult for a country that's not got statehood recognition yet across the world to actually have allies in a continent like Africa, where the African Union seems to have an iron fist sometimes when it comes to these issues. But are there allies that you recognize within the African continent that could provide Somaliland with that kind of protection and military support, friendship, as the UAE is seen to be in this case?
I think if I answer that question straight head on, is that Somaliland, with or without recognition, is going to continue as it is.
Yeah. Because
they have their own airspace. You can travel in and out of Somaliland. We have our own port. We're not reliant on Somalia or any other African country. We are self-sufficient in a way. Okay. So to get recognition is quite important, very significant. But if it doesn't come, we're there for the long haul. We're just like a Taiwan, a country who might not have a seat in the UN, but are going on the normal day-to-day businesses. We have our own police force, we have our own military, we have our own navy, we have our own currency, we have our own passports. So, and we can travel to other African countries. There's a daily flight from Addis Ababa to Hargeisa, and vice versa to Nairobi. So clearly, it will enhance to have the diplomatic or international recognition. But the Somalilands, whether the other African Union give us the support and recognition we want or not, we're there, we will continue as we are.
So some schools of thought think that the African Union has been hesitant more as a caution as opposed to an opposition. I think across the world it's sounding a lot like that. The more I read about Somaliland and its position, I do think it's still not quite position. I appreciate it's functional, but it still does. I think it's earned its right to sit at the table. So I wouldn't want to just say let it just be another Taiwan. I do think that Somaliland does have a legitimate case for sitting at the table. But the concerns I think that are raised, it's more cautionary, but 28 years is a bit too long to be cautious anymore, because discussions have happened, I think. It's more caution that once that happens, then for example, in my country like Zambia, there's in the western part of Zambia, there's a group as well that's got a very similar history to Somaliland in terms of the post-colonial context and what they went away with because they had a king. It's called the Barotseland. The Barotseland to me sounds a bit like Biafra. You know, so there are all those things, and the African Union is afraid that it will see a lot more secessions if that happens with Somaliland. But particularly, I would want to sort of unpick why specifically the Somaliland pose that much of a threat. As they seem to have conversations elsewhere, but why does Somaliland pose that much of a threat?
I will express my my disappointment with the African Union for not bringing Somaliland to the table, really. Somaliland has proved to the world what it can do in those 28 years. Yes, it's a long time, and I do agree with you when you say we don't just want to wait and see. I think they worked hard to actually be part of the African Union. Western countries and international Western countries are worried about perhaps what the African Union would think if they agree for Somaliland to be separated from Somalia, or to be recognized. It is separated, but as an African nation, we also should be asking why are we not, why is Somaliland not worthy enough to actually be part of the African Union? And I think that's part of the quest for recognition of Somaliland. I think we need to. I personally think, as a British politician, we are we know about Somaliland's issues and struggle. UK supports Somaliland's, as Adam mentioned earlier, when aid was going just specifically to Somalia, the UK obviously recognized the issues of Somaliland itself, and therefore the military and others have been supported, perhaps even aid not just to schools but also in terms of democracy building.
Yeah.
We don't see any of that coming from the African nations and members of the African Union, and that would be a good thing to see, the interest of members of the African Union doing that for Somaliland would actually be something that makes me, as a British Somalilander, to actually think, well, we are worth it. This is what people are saying. This is what people have been working hard. Even those of us who were born, I was born in Somaliland, but not necessarily lived in Somaliland for a very long time.
But it's your
home. And that's the thing. And that question, the more I get into more politics, the more I'm asking the question of, why is the African Union not even having the discussions of Somaliland recognition?
What do you think, Adam?
If I give you my personal view, my personal view is most of these African leaders, as much as it's good to have African Union, and they've been talking for the last 50 years, they themselves have achieved very little.
It's a talking shop.
It becomes a talking shop.
So from the organization of African Union to African Union,
even the headquarters in Addis Ababa, the building I heard was bought by the Chinese. And it was, so you have 50 countries who are totally independent with all that resources to have a building built by Chinese money and given the keys of the African Union is a shame, very shameful. And some of these leaders, they themselves, I can name few countries that I know, have been dictators for being in power for the last 30, 35 years. So for a Somaliland country with 28 years, with 4 elections successfully observed by international observers, from the European, from the African observers, to give a bill of pass, it puts them into shame.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of the elections that Somaliland has actually had over the years, that's just one of the hallmarks of what country qualifying for statehood looks like. You've got multi-party politics in Somaliland. What else can you pinpoint to me that's significant as far as recognition of statehood is concerned?
I think Adam touched on the social organization and the traditional aspect of conflict resolution. Which is one of the things that we've lost through colonialism, where clans and regions and societies actually were organized and run by chiefs. It was very functional, and then I think we went back to that. I think Somaliland went back to that, and that coupled with the wanting to actually build a country after going through bombardment in 1988. The whole of the cities, especially in particular Hargeisa, was completely destroyed. Ethiopia received quite heavy refugees, not internally refugees couldn't come back. There were landmines still being cleared as we speak today. And I think it comes from the people themselves wanting to build their country and give it back. And many Somalilanders I know across the diaspora are always trying to build schools, taking their skills back. And it comes from the people. So that's one thing. It's one traditional aspect approach, which is conflict resolution through the social organization of clans and regions and in Somaliland. And the other is willingness. People actually, enough is enough. We don't want to suffer in the hands of anyone else at the moment. We want to actually take ownership. And like Ada said, 28 year-olds don't really know anything about Somalia. They just know what Somaliland is, and that's their heritage, whether they're in diaspora or not. Speaking of remittances, I think the diaspora, Somaliland's diaspora, contributes to a huge portion of what does that look like in terms of figures and contribution to the GDP?
I mean, remittance is one of the areas we're very successful. And we have some of the best African remittance companies are based in Somaliland, and they've spread it all across Africa. They have their own banks, and we have all our own telecommunication. Unlike the country that I was born in, Kenya, which is perceived as very developed, but most of the telecom companies and banking are owned by foreign big companies, Vodafones and etc. Whereas in Somaliland, the banking system, the remittance, the telecom are all owned by Somalilanders. And yet they are advanced, technological, and very efficient and cheap.
So the story of Somaliland has yet to be told in that
Absolutely.
case, it sounds like to me.
Absolutely.
There's lots to be said, I think. So how does Somaliland navigate the legalities or perceived illegalities of signing contracts with other countries and, for example, even establishing companies like you've just talked about? How does it navigate Mogadishu? How do you circumnavigate Mogadishu to
Just to come back on the point, you mentioned the countries like UAE. Why are we, Somaliland is going to countries like UAE?
Yeah.
You have to understand, countries have interest.
Yeah.
So the UAE come to Somaliland not out of love, out of strategically. We're strategically located. Yeah. So if the Africans are blind on that, of course we will go elsewhere, where the Somaliland interest lies. And yet we extend our hands of friendship to the 54 African head of states. But if they ignore us, of course, we are strategically located. We have huge natural resources. We will. The world has become global, and yet, therefore, it's give and take. If countries who come to us, knock at our door, and have something to we can benefit, our community or our country can benefit, and equally they can benefit. Of course, our country will speak to them with an open mind.
Absolutely. You go where you want
it's
to.
A self-interest.
You go where you can, and you've also got self-interest. So
Absolutely.
it's whichever way you look at it.
All these 54 African countries do deal with other Chinese, with the Western world, with the Middle East. Why can't we?
It's very global. Businesses are very global, and political relations.
It still comes down to the question of, well, I agree, you should, and it's important that you should trade independently with the fact that you are self-declared, except for that international recognition. How do you circumnavigate Mogadishu? How do you leave them out? How does that work? I genuinely want to know how it works. How do you manage that?
Just if I interrupt, Kaltum, companies or countries who want to work with you or trade with you, the most important thing they look is stability.
Yeah.
If you have stability and the other side is not stable.
Well, and Somalia right now is considered quite fragile.
All they will have to look at the track record of Somaliland. 20 years of stability, of a structure, institution, and the safeguarding of the investors, foreign investors, foreign direct investments, the safeguarding of that. These are what the companies and international countries look at. So we meet all those criteria. So we have something to sell or market. And if they see in comparison, of course they'll come and do business with Somaliland.
Absolutely. Okay, I hear you there. Let's go back a little bit to governance. You being in politics over here, amazing. It's very impressive. I want to understand the model of the chambers in the Somaliland government. So you've got the House representatives and you've got the elders. I think that's... I come from a country where we don't get the elders, but I do live in a country that culturally has this high reverence for the elders. We respect our elders, and they kind of... We've got the House of Chiefs, but it doesn't have as much influence as I saw in the when the 2015 elections in Somaliland were deferred to 2017. That voice came from your elders. Yeah. How does that work?
Remember we discussed the issue of the social organization in terms of traditional cultural conflict resolution. The House of Elders comes from that as well. But to actually have not House of Lords or any other, but to have House of Elders, that tradition is there. That's where the stability comes from. That's how the political stability comes from. But then in terms of the other house, it's just like any other political organization, political governance, just like the UK as well. What I was gonna, before we forget, say, when I went to Somaliland, one of the things that I went to do because I went there to see my family, and I was there just for 2 weeks.
This was last month. I think I saw that.
And I was really quite excited to speak to the women who are putting themselves forward to become local councillors and MPs, and ask them why. And it's a whole films and stories on its own to actually talk to some of the women who fled the country as young girls when they came back wanting to become politicians and to bring change, but have the respect for the House of Elders and always get the advice from there, which is...
How big is the impact then, Adam, of the House of Elders? Am I right that in reading that they asked the country to prioritize shifting of the 2015 elections to 2017 because they wanted the parliamentarian elections to align with the presidential election? Is that correct?
Yeah.
I think all these issues are there. I think it's more about consultation. And we respect highly our elders. We've given them a position of, and where they're in the House of equivalent House of Lords, and we call them Gurti. They're highly respected, so they're consulted, and they're linked to the grassroots.
Right.
So clearly, that information of consultation, of looking
starts from there and
absolutely,
comes
and they will discuss everything at its merits, and they will be upfront with it, and there will be a level of compromise for the sake of Somaliland.
How many representatives is that combined? Is it 82 House representatives and 82 elders? Is that right? It sounds like a lot to me for a country with about 4 million. I think it is 82 the elders, the traditional ones, and 82 the others. To me, it sounds quite a lot. So how do you identify the elders? Is it across? I know it's you all speak Somali, but is it within Somali you've got different dialects, and that's where the elders come from? How do they come up?
I think each different city have different and tribes, sub-clans, etc. And most of them come from those areas, and therefore they are represented, so that there's obviously equity in terms of balance of power. And obviously it's not a perfect model, but it does work. And one thing they recognize, for the sake of the country and the aspiration to be recognized at the back of their mind, development, progressive, and not wanting to go to conflicts and destruction. So and the older generation think for the younger generation, so that they can leave something for them at the end. So there is no, if you like, selfishness or greediness. It's for a common future for all. Obviously there will be issues to be discussed like any other, but I think we have a model where you can air your grievances and come to a resolution. So that has worked. That has worked
for you guys, and it's still working. So 28 years on, again, I'm going to say congratulations, because it's self-declared. That's what the people want. So it's no one's place to take that away from you guys. So I'm happy for you. Coalitions, you've got a multi-party system in Somaliland. That seems to work. Coalitions generally don't work well. They work during campaigns, but they don't seem to work well. They've worked for Somaliland. How is that happening when it's failing elsewhere?
You're about okay. The political parties in Somalia, when they're campaigning, it's very radical.
Okay.
You think that no one's going to speak to anyone after this, but to actually work together, it's for the better of the country. It looks like, even though when you're campaigning, you're really campaigning hard, and it's like as if that they will never speak to each other again, and they'll never work together again. But once the councillors and the MPs come out and they have to work together for the better of the people, it's not much problem. I think majority of the conflict happens between the parties outside the chambers,
it's more
outside
the supporters as opposed to the politicians.
And it's more of a what's expected of you as elected as well. And as Adam mentioned, House of Elders are not the only place where the regions and clans are represented. They're also represented in the elected members as well.
Okay.
And so
I'm going to have to cut you off because it looks like we're running out of time already. So as far as you're both concerned, 28 years on, what do you want Somalilanders in diaspora, especially the children that you are raising, to take away from where you are and where you would like to see the country going?
I would like the international community to recognize Somaliland, but not only just do it like that, but to make sure that they support the Somalilanders in the diaspora, specifically cities like Sheffield, which recognized Somaliland not long ago. But what I would like to see is a lot more talks in the African Union. Even those of us in the diaspora should be really discussing. Should have conversation about Somaliland.
And you, Adam?
Just to add, recently in the 28th celebration, Ugandan Parliament were there.
Oh, good.
And a full delegation sent by Yoweri Museveni. The leader of the Ugandan Parliament was there, both and the opposition and the Ugandan Parliament fully represented, and they were very surprised. Kenya were there, Ethiopia were there, a lot of other European countries were there. Recently, Obasanjo, the ex-Nigerian president, was invited through an organization called Brain Hast Foundation from South Africa.
I'm really going to have to stop you. This conversation has been really enlightening for me.
Yes, brilliant.
So thanks so much for joining us on African Voices this evening. It's been me, Chiwe, with Kaltum and Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you.